right, well, let's get going. Welcome to the January. Can't believe it's January already, but it's the January webinar. We've got Carlyn Young, our registered dietitian. She's back with us. And we're going to be talking about nutrition again, but also with a focus on cardiovascular risk reduction. So cardiovascular disease is still the remaining or the main cause of death amongst firefighters line of duty. That is still occurring. And it's happened for years and years, and it continues to be the case. So for the deaths that occur on duty, this remains the leading cause. So really kind of looking to explore what it is that nutrition, what role that plays in it, and then if steps we can take that are reasonable and realistic for us as firefighters, both on and off duty. So glad to have Carlyn back. But I wanted to start off with a couple of statistics I thought were kind of interesting just to tee this up. We know I've mentioned it before, but it is the leading cause of death. An Oklahoma State University study in 2021 mentioned that heart attacks are the leading cause of on-duty deaths amongst firefighters, accounting for 54% of the total on-duty deaths, which is a staggering stat. It's been that way for years. Really working to trying to get that fixed. And then the same OSU article states that most common personal health issues for firefighters are high cholesterol and high blood pressure. So we're going to talk about that and how food impacts that. We know lifestyle really plays a big role in that, but again, want to make sure we're taking this approach that it's realistic and it's not a full sweeping change, because we know that life happens and it's hard to make modifications that stick if we go on a strict elimination or things like that. So we're really trying to be purposeful and realistic about the changes we can make and sustain as we go about a healthier lifestyle. So Carlyn, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's January. You got any big focuses for 2026 or 2025?
2025. Yes. Having our first baby. And so that is a big focus.
Awesome.
Yeah. New ventures.
Yeah. New ventures in 2025. That's going to be huge. So well, we're glad to have you today. Well, let's jump right into nutrition. A few questions around this. But I think as we go through this, when we think about nutrition, we think about kind of the standard American diet. There's lots of challenges, I think, within that. And I think we see that, everywhere. Kind of, can you touch real briefly on kind of how that tees people up to struggle with kind of nutrition?
Yeah. So that standard American diet, a lot of people call it the SAD diet, SAD. And the great thing about that diet is that it's convenient, right? It allows us to have food at our fingertips. Vegetables are cut up in the grocery store, pre-washed, cut up, ready for you to take, fruits and vegetables. But then we also have a lot of foods that have high energy density that are extremely convenient as well. And as human beings, we're trying to survive. Our bodies naturally gravitate towards that high energy dense food. And those foods are going to have more salt, sugar, and fat added to them, because they make them taste better. And then we can actually use those for longer periods of time, so we don't have to eat as often. So our body likes to go towards those types of foods. When we eat foods that have an excess amounts of fat, sugar, and salt in them, we have more inflammation in our body because our body isn't utilizing all of those nutrients or calories on a given basis, because we're not as active as we need to be to eat that energy dense diet. So what we find is that all these convenient foods, lots of energy, we don't use it all. Our body has to figure out what to do with it. That kind of causes that inflammation, making it harder for our body to pump blood throughout our body, and causing that heart disease.
So the excess in, go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say too, it's the SAD diet or whatever. It still also has all those convenient foods that are like, those fruits and vegetables. We just don't go towards them as often. Right.
Because we got other choices that taste better and feel better. They're more, they just taste better in general. So when you say there's like the caloric excess, that's getting stored as fat, right? So then it's harder for our cardiovascular system to push and supply blood through all that existing tissue, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, we're storing all that extra energy, and there's like an acute inflammatory response when we eat in excess amounts of sugar. Our blood sugars go up. Our body has to figure out where to put that. We do store that as fat eventually, but there's those types of little inflammatory responses that happen when we eat an excess amount of food.
Gotcha. And so when we talk about cholesterol, um,
hmm
HDL and LDL, can you touch on that? Just get a brief introduction of kind of what they are, what the differences are, and how we're seeing those.
Yeah, so that HDL is more considered like that happy cholesterol for happy for H. And so when you go to the doctor's office, you get a lipid panel and you see your total cholesterol, your HDL cholesterol, and your LDL cholesterol on there. And that HDL cholesterol, we want that number to be a little bit higher. So your doctor is usually saying like, okay, let's bump up that HDL. And that's because it helps remove cholesterol from our body, whereas the LDL cholesterol, we're usually wanting to lower that cholesterol. At least that's what your cardiologist or your doctor is normally telling you. And so that's because that LDL cholesterol, it actually is responsible for depositing more cholesterol into through your arteries and clogging that system. So we want less of the LDL, the lousy cholesterol, and a little bit more of that HDL cholesterol. That being said, cholesterol is really important in our body, and it has responsibilities in like hormone health, digestion. It makes up our cell membranes. So it is a really important thing to have. We just want the right balance of it. And we want it to be able to do its job efficiently. And when we eat specific types of diets, it kind of puts that balance of the cholesterol in out of whack. And it doesn't let it do its job.
Okay. And then, so as we're looking to control cholesterol, increasing cardiovascular effort, right? Cardiac, cardio exercise. But in terms of food choices, are there some that are better than others?
Yeah. So say your doctor says, hey, you need to lower your LDL cholesterol. You would want to increase the amount of fiber you're taking in. So that fiber coming from fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, that helps actually remove or bind to that cholesterol in your GI tract and get rid of it. And so when we have diets that are really, really low in fiber, but say high in saturated fats, that's when the LDL cholesterol can go up more. And so we want a good balance of fats. We also want a good balance of fiber in our diet. So adding in more foods with fiber, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds on a regular basis is ideal. And you want about 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day.
Okay. So in total, 25 to 35 grams of fiber.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then along the lines of healthy fats, what are your conditions to get that? I mean, saturated fats are kind of the one to stay away from, but fats are important. It's part of the macronutrients that make us up. So what are you recommending in terms of the healthy fats and where to get them?
Yeah. So yeah, like you said, you need the fats in our diet. And for a long time, people were saying low fat diets are the best way to go. And now they're saying ketogenic diets are the best way to go. And I like to find it somewhere in the middle where it's like, well, we need fats, but we need carbs and we need protein. So those healthy fats that you want to incorporate more often are going to be your unsaturated fats that are coming from more plant sources. So avocados, olive oil, nuts and seeds, like ground flax seeds, walnuts, almonds, things like that. I feel like there's one that I'm forgetting there. And then fish too. Fish have a lot of really healthy omega-3s in them. So we want to incorporate that at least twice a week. While increasing that unsaturated fat, we want to make sure our intake of saturated fat coming from animal products, so like high fat meat products, think just like a steak that has a lot of marbling in it, or really high fat percentage of ground beef. Those are going to have higher amounts saturated fat, which are going to increase that LDL cholesterol.
So the
So
ground
we
beef,
want less of those.
you mentioned the fat percentage within the ground beef. I think that's an easy one to cook with a lot. A lot of people use that for burgers or
Yeah.
whatever the choice may be. So, lean ground beef, is that a 7% or like a 93%? But what are you looking for?
Yeah. Honestly, anything 10% fat, 90% lean, that is a good place to start.
Okay.
If you're in that 90% range for the lean part of the beef, then that's a good range to be in. And then when you're cooking those too, like letting the grease drain off versus sucking it all into the patties and things like that, and topping it with avocado versus topping it with a bunch of cheese or mayo.
Yep. Got it. And you mentioned a couple of the diets prior. So keto, and then there was the low fat diet, and there's the list goes on, right? We hear a lot about Mediterranean diet and how important that is for our health. Like, can you speak to, fact or fiction, or if that's something you really, there's portions of that you like?
Yeah, the Mediterranean style diet has the most research around it for cardiovascular disease and for a lot of other health benefits as well. So that is one that I would recommend always to, honestly, majority of people who are looking for anti-inflammatory, who are looking to help with heart disease, who are looking to improve their cognition and prevent dementia later on in life. So that Mediterranean style diet is going to be fish forward, nuts and seeds, whole grains, fruits and vegetables, incorporating all those things into our day-to-day eating. And so, yeah, the Mediterranean style diet is still the one that has the most research behind it. And there might be other diets that are right for some people, but the Mediterranean it's as close as we get to one size fits all.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and it is hard, I think when we were talking earlier about broad sweeping changes and really eliminating things, I think making a few of these choices and, implementing a few components of the Mediterranean diet is always helpful, right? If baseline is trying to get to that completely awesome, but understanding that, life happens and working in the stations, things like that, there's some limitations. So
yeah, absolutely.
You mentioned, Mediterranean diet's very fish forward. We talked briefly about, kind of ground beef and the lean to fat ratio and things like that. Red meat as a whole, what's your thoughts on that in terms of reducing the risk?
Red meat as a whole, it is overconsumed in the United States. So that's where the focus always is that a big part of our diet is red meat. Whereas it's not necessarily red meat is bad. It's just we are eating a lot of it and we're not getting a lot of protein from other sources. So my recommendation is red meat for like a dinner meal once to twice a week, but making sure that you're also incorporating chicken and you're incorporating fish. And maybe one of the nights you're having a vegetable source of protein, like you're doing beans and rice and tofu or things like that. It's just a little different. Or we're adding in eggs for a protein source at dinner. So it's not red meat is a bad thing. It's just our overconsumption of it is leading to issues. But I will say too, in Oregon or West Coast in general, there's a lot more hunting that goes on. And so a lot of people will be getting their own meat. So like elk, it's extremely lean red meat. And so I always encourage people, if like you have a freezer full of that, utilize that more than buying the meat from the store.
Yeah, that's a great point. When you talk about getting additional sources, so the 1 day a week, right? If you could get there from vegetable sources, I think that's one of the things we hear, at least I think, around a plant-based or getting that 1 time a week. It's the challenge is getting enough protein in a given day. So I think, so it's the beans, eggs, right? Tofu, those end up being decent sources of protein.
Yeah, those are decent sources of protein. But then I would also add in Greek yogurt or cottage cheese. Those are also really great sources of protein that aren't meat focused.
Cool. Yeah, red meat's a fan favorite, right? Certainly for household, fire stations across the nation, same deal. So I think just making a few tweaks would would be helpful. So when you're looking at a plate, right? Let's just use dinner as an example. Is there a general guideline or a recommendation that you have around how you would position that plate in terms of, is it half vegetables, quarter protein?
Mhm.
Like how do you generally recommend? And certainly for firefighters who are needing the additional protein and the carbs, likely.
Yeah. So for a general adult, we're gonna say half that plate being vegetable, quarter plate being carbohydrate, which would be your fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and then a quarter of that plate being a protein. But on those days where you have high energy expenditure, you've been on a fire for a while, or your load is really high, we need to increase the amount of carbohydrates, and so that's going to cut in on the vegetable source. So if we have a high energy output day, we need to increase our carbs, maintain the protein that you are eating, but decrease the vegetables. But if it's like a low activity day, half plate of vegetables.
Okay. Yeah. And that makes sense. You just have to kind of be flexible with what you're, forecasting what you're expending, right? And then being able to adjust that on the fly. But I think in general, I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So in terms of modifying our food choices to make them a little bit more heart healthy, I think, you talked earlier about straining the ground beef, but are there some general recommendations around, as you're looking to prep breakfast, lunch, and dinner or snacks in between, how do we modify those to make them just a bit more heart healthy?
Well, I think you said the most important thing there is that you are doing the prep. And so if we can cook more foods from home, they are always going to be better for us because there's going to be less added to them. They're not going to have as much salt. They're not going to add as much sugar to it. And so if we can make more of our food from home, that's first step. When we are doing that, adding in those healthy fats. So like if you're making oatmeal or like overnight oats, say add in ground flaxseed, add in chia seeds, maybe use some peanut butter in there. So you're adding in some of those healthy fats. Cooking with olive oil is always a good way of doing it versus cooking with like just regular vegetable oil or corn oil or like bacon grease. Always try for more of cooking with that olive oil, or avocado oil is a good option too. It has less of a flavor.
Okay.
Adding in fish twice a week. So it doesn't have to be fresh salmon caught from the coast, right? It can be tinned fish. So grabbing cans of fish and using that in your lunches is a really convenient way of getting that fish in twice a week, but not having to do all of this prep or make big changes.
Yeah. And I think that's, cooking from home is awesome as best you can, but it ends up being, you're prepping and then eating and cleaning. So I think meal prepping, right? I've heard that to be successful for folks. If you're going to use a day, set out a schedule, try and prep or use leftovers just so you're reducing that effort. Because I think that is probably one of the limiting factors that I would recognize is just the time to do that. It's not nearly as convenient as a quick grab and go. So utilizing the prep time, right? To do it all at once. How about snacks? Like what are some decent snack options that are, whether you're prepping them ahead of time or it's a quick, like easy grab and go?
Yeah, I like to think of it when we're doing like heart healthy snacks, think of healthy fats and something with fiber. So that could be a piece of fruit with nut butter. So like apple and peanut butter. You do celery and almond butter with some raisins on there. Carrots and hummus is always a good option. And just like trail mix, dried fruit and nuts. That's easy. You can go to the store, you can get a giant thing of trail mix, depending on the type of trail mix. They're not all made the same. Some, have different mixes in there, but trying to find the kind that has the dried fruit in there and a variety of nuts too.
Perfect. And then in terms of, if we're rounding out meals, right, and snacking in between, trying to get the balance of fiber and all the macros, where do you tend to see people fall short in terms of needing extra like supplementation?
So yeah, we can get most of our heart healthy foods from our diet or nutrients. So, trying to have fish twice a week, making sure we're eating enough fiber. most of that can come from our diet. But two supplements that I have found helpful for people who have high cholesterol or high triglycerides and are trying to sort through that for cardiovascular disease are omega 3s. So taking a capsule of omega 3s daily, you want to look at specifically making sure they have DHA and EPA in them. Those are two things that really help with lowering the LDL, raising the HDL, and helping with triglycerides as well. So those omega 3s, and then Metamucil. So something that has fiber in it, that I've used that with patients who have a lot of familial hypercholesterolemia. So just like genetics are playing a huge role in having the cholesterol be high. Adding in fiber with Metamucil on a daily basis can be really helpful. And I've seen that help lower that cholesterol levels. But other than that, you can get everything else you need from your diet. But if we're looking at lowering specific lab values, those are two supplements that I would use.
Okay. Yeah. And, Metamucil is an easy one, right? When I was working, it was a firehouse favorite, right? It was in the morning, everybody would kind of do their round of Metamucil and get the additional that we weren't getting through the day. So
there you go.
Kind of an easy fix. It was a group effort. So if we're looking to build like a better dietary approach, especially in station, right, where meals are typically together, they're on a station budget. Everybody kicks in money for the day, and then you go shop, or you would bring, hit the grocery store prior.
Yeah.
What are some like decent methods to think around building that for the firehouse culture? Understanding, there's a little bit of a stigma around healthy eating is a bit more expensive, right? So trying to modify, the cost contained, but also have it fit the lifestyle, taste good, but it's also healthy for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that can be challenging when you're cooking for like a larger amount of people, but buying in bulk is going to be really helpful. So going to those stores that actually have bulk amounts of foods, being vegetables and fruits too, having that in bulk. And always, I think if we're planning those meals in advance for a group of people, where is our vegetable coming from? Do we have a source of color in the meal? And if you can say yes to that, you're going in the right direction. So say, okay, we need to have color. Where are we getting it from in this meal? And is our protein source lean? So those two questions can direct to a healthier meal in general, I feel.
Okay. So again, lean sources of protein, chicken, turkey, fish, right? And then the leaner
meats too
of red meats.
Yeah, red meat. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
One additional question, lunch meat. I know, that's one of those things that's pretty common, I think, for a lot of people, is to have deli meats. I've heard things around it being considered a carcinogen, unhealthy because of salt content. Like, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, it can be part of a healthy diet. I do think that all foods can fit in our diets. They have a lot of salt in them. So if we are eating low sodium at the other times of our day, like we're having oatmeal at breakfast and then we're having like a homemade chili at dinner or something like that, our sodium intake isn't going to be that high. But if we're having a lot of salt in both other meals, that deli meat can be contributing factor there and raising that blood pressure. So try for the low sodium. Also, we only need about 3 to 4 slices of that meat on our sandwiches to be our full protein source. So like one slice is usually about an ounce, and that has 7 grams of protein in it. So if you're doing 3 slices on your sandwich, that's going to give you about 21 grams of protein. 4 slices, about 28 grams of protein. So you don't need 5, 6, 7 slices on that sandwich, and making sure that you're adding something that has fiber to that sandwich. So you're eating it with whole grain bread. We're adding tomatoes to it. We're adding a lettuce to it of some kind, maybe an avocado. So you're getting that fiber with the meat source of protein.
Yeah, perfect.
But it could definitely fit.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and that's good because
Yeah.
I think that's one of those choices. It's easy, right? You swing by
Yeah.
the store, you can grab a pound of it. It'll last for a little
Yep.
while in the house or at the station. So I think
Yep.
that's a good way to modify it and use it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate kind of your approach to this whole thing is it's moderation, right? Is kind of what I'm understanding in previous conversations too. It's like let's be
Yeah.
practical about this. Let's be realistic about what we can actually achieve, uh,
Hmm.
and understand that it's really hard to keep changes in place that are eliminations, right? Where you're getting rid of
Right.
everything you enjoy and it just makes it harder to stick with. So it's really just
Hmm.
creating some consistency and some foundations that are going to allow you to have some better food choices over time. And I think, as
Yeah.
you have more experience with better food choices, that becomes more of the norm, but it does take time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And I like to think of it as what can we add to our diet versus what can we take away? Because when we add in those good things, there's not as much room for some of the other stuff. So it's kind of like a natural occurrence that your diet does balance out. So I always think about what can I add to my meals that are going to make it heart healthy.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Perfect. Anything else that I missed that you think are, super important points that we want to touch on before we take off?
Not necessarily. I think just keeping it in, big picture is that this is one part of our health that we can control. We have control over our food. So it's like, okay, what can I do here to improve my heart health? But also knowing that there's stress involved and there's physical activity and there's genetics involved with heart disease. And so just remembering it is a big picture and that if you don't do everything perfect with your diet, there's other ways that we can improve.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Carl. And I think just being aware of that and just knowing, hey, these are the controllables, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, and just being realistic about what you can and can't do. And
Yeah.
sometimes things just get beyond your control, and you got to eat still. And maybe the choice isn't awesome, but if most of the time we're making good choices, you're probably on the right track. So, um,
Exactly.
perfect. Well, thanks for being back with us. This is a really
Yeah.
important topic. I'm obviously very appreciative of you taking the time to shed some light on this. Diet and food choices can be really confusing. There's tons of different information out there, so I think getting it right from
Hmm.
the source is pretty helpful, and just understanding that moderation really is key. So
Yep.
we'll post in the newsletter when the office hours will be. But yeah, we'll open it up and allow folks to log on and ask questions. But thanks for being here, and we'll
Yeah.
talk to everybody here again soon.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, Brandon.